Imagine a courtroom frozen in time, the air thick with tension as a man in a worn-out prison jumpsuit stands before a judge, his voice steady but carrying the weight of 1,000 secrets, and declares, "Your Honor, I'm not who they think I am," while gasps ripple through the crowd like wildfire. Picture the stunned face of a female cop in the back row, her smug confidence crumbling faster than a house of cards because she thought she had this black inmate cornered, thought she could bend him to her will with lies and power. But what she didn't know was that John Smith wasn't just another prisoner. He was a top-ranking CIA agent working deep undercover in a maximum security hellhole to dismantle a drug trafficking empire that's been choking lives across the country in 2023, and on this day, in this courtroom, the truth he carried was about to explode like a grenade, tearing down every wall of corruption around him. This isn't just a story of crime or punishment, it's a raw, real tale of a man clinging to his honor, his marriage, and his mission against all odds, a man who walked into a concrete jungle knowing he might never walk out, all to save lives nobody else could reach. And what you're about to hear will grip you, move you, and show you what happens when courage collides with chaos. So strap in, because John's journey through blackmail, betrayal, and a battle for justice is one ride you won't forget. John Smith's life once unfolded in the soft glow of ordinary moments. A black man in his late 30s, broad-shouldered and steady-eyed, laughing as he steadied his daughter's wobbly bike on a cracked suburban sidewalk, or leaning across the dinner table to steal a kiss from his wife, Lisa, while their 2 kids giggled and pretended to gag. He was the kind of husband who remembered anniversaries with flowers, the kind of father who built pillow forts on rainy days. A man whose deep voice could soothe a scraped knee or rally a neighborhood barbecue, but beneath that warmth lay a wound that never quite healed, a jagged scar left by the death of his best friend, Chris, a brother in all but blood, who'd slipped away on a bathroom floor, needle still in his arm, a casualty of the drug tide drowning their community in slow motion. And it was that loss, that helpless rage, that pulled John from his quiet life into the CIA's orbit. His sharp mind and unshakable resolve making him the perfect recruit to fight the trafficking rings he blamed for stealing Chris away. John sprinting through obstacle courses, sweat streaking his face as trainers bark orders, his hands steadying a pistol at a firing range, his brow furrowed over late-night codebooks, every grueling hour a step closer to turning his grief into action, while mock interviews weave in the voices of those who know him best. Lisa, her eyes soft yet shadowed, saying, he'd come home exhausted, but he'd still tuck the kids in. He never let us see how much it weighed on him. Then comes the briefing, a sterile room with flickering fluorescent lights, where a stern agent lays out the mission. John, you're going undercover in Blackwood Penitentiary, a maximum security hellhole where the inmates and guards run a drug ring so tight it's flooding streets coast to coast. You'll be on your own, no backup, no safety net, and if they sniff you out, you're done. And John, jaw tight, nods, because this isn't just a job, it's a vow to Chris, to his kids, to every family shattered by the same poison, spilling from those concrete walls. Back home, Lisa grips his hands, her voice breaking as she whispers, he promised he'd come back to us no matter what. And John, pressing his lips to her forehead, murmurs, I will, I swear, though the weight of that promise pressed down like a stone as he walked away, leaving behind his young family. John wasn't just a hero in the shadows, he was a man with everything to lose. And as he stepped through Blackwood's looming gates, his wedding ring slipped into a hidden pocket. John Smith transformed, no longer just a father or husband but a ghost in a den of wolves. His everyday struggles, balancing school runs with secret training, shielding his family from the truth, now fuel for a noble goal, to rip out the heart of the drug ring and protect his community. A mission that made him both relatable and toweringly admirable, not just from the tattooed inmates eyeing him like prey, but from a guard with a predator's gaze, her silent scrutiny, hinting at a storm brewing, one that will test every ounce of John's strength, cunning, and heart, because in Blackwood, survival isn't guaranteed, and promises even to the ones he loves most hang by a thread. As John Smith stepped through the iron gates of Blackwood Penitentiary, the clang of metal reverberates like a death knell. his heart thundering beneath the coarse orange jumpsuit that marked him as one of the damned. Every nerve in his body crackled with adrenaline, his senses sharpened as he took in the sprawling fortress of concrete and steel stretching before him, a labyrinth of guard towers piercing the sky like vultures, razor wire glinting menacingly under flickering fluorescence, an air thick with the stench of sweat, bleach, and an undercurrent of something primal, something like fear itself. He keeps his head low, eyes darting to etch the layout into his memory, the yard where clusters of inmates flex their presence, their tattoos and scars weaving tales of violence and survival, the mess hall buzzing with tension, and the shadowed corridors where secrets fester like rot. But John wasn't here to merely endure this hell, he was here to hunt, a CIA agent cloaked as an inmate, tasked with dismantling the drug empire thriving within these walls, an empire ruled by Marcus, the Butcher Kane, a kingpin whose name alone conjures dread, his eyes black and unfeeling as ice, his reputation forged in blood with a penchant for gutting snitches without hesitation. In the mess hall, John shuffled with his tray, blending into the sea of orange, his gaze flicking to Marcus's table where the kingpin holds court, surrounded by lieutenants whose loud laughs mask their vigilance, their pockets stuffed with contraband cellophane-wrapped promises of power and their whispers weaving a web of shipments and deals that stretch beyond the barbed wire into the free world. John's mission was crystalline: gather intel, map the network, and torch it all to the ground. But as he memorized faces and decodes hushed conversations, another pair of eyes locks onto him, predatory, unrelenting, belonging to Officer Jane Doe, a white female guard whose crisp uniform belies a crooked smile, her reputation a twisted blend of rule-bending and spirit-breaking, a woman who thrived in the gray spaces of authority. The prison's shadows deepened one evening as Jane cornered John in a secluded hallway, her boots clicking ominously on the linoleum, her voice dripping low and honeyed. "You're new, and I can make your time here a lot easier, if you know what I mean." Her fingers grazing his arm with intent as clear as the daylight he hasn't seen in days. John stiffened, his jaw clenching like a vice, and he stepped back, his voice cutting through her offer like a blade. "I'm married, and I don't play that game," the words landing heavy, a gauntlet thrown between them. Jane's smile faltered, her eyes narrowed to slits, and she leaned in close, her breath hot against his ear. "You'll wish you had said yes, inmate," the threat coiling like smoke as she saunters away, leaving John clutching the hidden wedding ring in his pocket, a talisman of the life he's sworn to protect, a tether to his wife and children beyond these walls. The air shifts, charged with the weight of her words. Jane saw John as prey, a man she could break or bend, but his refusal wasn't just defiance, it was a spark that lit a fuse, one that would burn through the lies and corruption choking Blackwood, and neither of them knew how fiercely it would explode. The emotional hook sinks deep, igniting outrage at Jane's blatant abuse of power, her manipulation steeped in racial and gender dynamics, her whiteness and authority clashing against John's blackness and feigned vulnerability, twisting the knife of injustice until it's personal, visceral, making fists clench and pulses race for this man trapped between two predators, one cloaked in cartel swagger, the other in sanctioned cruelty. Yet, as John lay on his bunk that night, staring at the cracked ceiling spiderwebbing above him, his mind didn't churn with fear, it raced with strategy, a chessboard unfolding in his head, because he was no ordinary inmate, no victim to be chewed up by this machine. He was a husband clutching a promise, a father fueled by love, and a CIA operative honed for war, and neither a crooked guard nor a cartel kingpin would derail him while he still drew breath. The days bled into one another, each a tightrope walk, with John shadowing Marcus's crew, noting the rhythm of their smuggling, the guards they bought, the inmates they had broken, all while Jane's presence loomed like a storm cloud, her every glance a promise of retribution. She began to tighten the screws, assigning him to the grimiest shifts, planting rumors that he was a snitch, her crooked smile flashing as she watched him squirm under the weight of her vendetta. But John was adapting, his resolve hardening like steel. He traded favors for whispers, he sketched the empire's arteries in his mind, and kept his wedding ring close, a silent vow that he'll walk out of this alive. The tension coiled tighter, Marcus's lieutenants grew wary, their eyes lingering too long on John during roll call, while Jane's taunts sharpen, her baton twirling as she mutters, "Keep playing noble, Inmate, see where it gets you, her voice a venomous thread weaving through the cacophony of clanging bars and shouted threats. The prison itself seemed to pulse. A pressure cooker of concrete and rage, every corner hiding a deal, every shadow a blade, and John stood at its heart, a lone spark waiting to ignite it all. The stakes skyrocketed when John overheard a coded exchange, Marcus planning a massive shipment, a move that could flood the streets with poison and cement his reign, and he knew time was bleeding out. He scribbled notes on stolen scraps, risks a dead drop to his handler, but Jane's shadow stretched closer, her instinct sniffing out his defiance like blood in the water. One night, she caught him slipping a note beneath a loose tile, her boots silent until they were not, and she slammed him against the wall, her baton pressing into his throat. Who are you talking to, huh? Think you're smarter than me? Her eyes blazed with triumph, but John's stare didn't waver, his voice rasping, back off, or you'll regret it, a bluff wrapped in truth, because he was not just fighting for himself anymore. She laughed, low and cruel, and confiscated the note, but it was too late. The fuse was lit, the game tilting as Marcus's crew tightened their circle, whispers of a rat rippling through the yard. And Jane's corruption began to fray at the edges, her alliance with the kingpin surfacing in stolen glances and hushed payoffs. Blackwood wasn't just a prison, it was a battlefield, and John was its reckoning, a man who'd turn their game against them, no matter the cost. The outrage swelled, Jane's abuse a raw wound, Marcus's tyranny a cancer, and John's quiet fury a beacon, because this wasn't just survival, it was justice, and as he gripped that wedding ring, he vowed to burn it all down, badge and empire alike, until he was free to hold his family again. The whispers started like a slow poison, seeping through the dank cell blocks of Blackwood Penitentiary and out into the cracked concrete yard. John Smith was a snitch, a rat, the kind of lowlife who'd trade his soul to shave a few years off his sentence. It all began with Officer Jane Doe, her voice a venomous hiss in the guard's break room, thick with the stale smell of burnt coffee and cigarette ash. That new inmate. John, he's been asking too many questions, poking his nose where it doesn't belong. I'd bet my badge he's working with the feds. The other guards, their uniforms wrinkled from long shifts, exchanged knowing glances, one muttering, "We'll keep an eye on him," his baton tapping rhythmically against his palm like a countdown to trouble. Out in the yard, John felt the shift as sharp as a shank's edge. Men he'd traded smokes with under the flickering floodlights now turned their backs, their eyes narrowing with suspicion, while others whispered behind calloused hands, their murmurs buzzing like flies over a corpse. Even his cellmate, Rico, a wiry ex-con with a chipped front tooth, cornered him one night against the cold steel bunk. "Hey, man, word's going around you're a snitch, that true?" John locked eyes with him, his voice steady as stone. "No, Rico, I'm just here to do my time, same as you," but the doubt clung to the air, a shadow that trailed him through the echoing corridors. Jane wasn't content to stop there. Her vendetta was a fire she stoked with every petty cruelty she could muster. The next day, John shuffled into the phone line, his chest tight with the ache to hear Lisa's voice, to anchor himself to the life he'd left behind. But the guard at the booth, a squat man, with a lazy eye, shook his head. "Sorry, Smith, your call privileges are revoked." John's gut twisted. "What? Why?" The guard shrugged, his tone flat. "Orders from above," and John knew it was Jane, her spite tightening around him like a noose. Soon after, his commissary access vanished. No more soap to scrub the prison grime from his skin, no toothpaste to chase the sour taste of defeat, no stale crackers to quiet the gnawing hunger between meals. He clenched his fists until his knuckles whitened, but he swallowed the rage, knowing every ounce of energy had to fuel the mission. Still burning in his veins, amid the chaos, a sliver of hope pierced the gloom. In the prison library, a dim cave of peeling paint and yellowed books, John slumped over a tattered paperback, his ears straining as Marcus's gravelly voice drifted from a corner table. "The shipment's hitting Tuesday. Laundry truck double the haul, pure as snow. Make sure the guards are greased up good." John's pulse hammered in his throat. This was it. The golden thread that could unravel Marcus's drug empire and justify every scar this hellhole had etched into him. Back in his cell, the walls pressed in like a vice, he scratched the details onto a scrap of toilet paper with a pencil stub. the faint scratch of graphite, a lifeline in the dark. He hid it beneath his mattress, a secret ticking like a bomb. But Jane's power trip was far from over. Late that night, as the prison sank into an uneasy hush broken only by the distant clang of steel and the coughs of restless men, she crept into John's cell, her boots silent on the concrete, a torn piece of her uniform stained with a smear of blood clutched in her hand like a hunter's prize. With a smirk that twisted her face into something feral, she slipped it under his mattress, her movements precise, predatory, then vanished into the shadows. Morning brought chaos. The guards stormed in like a pack of wolves, their shouts ricocheting off the walls as they flipped his bunk. "What's this, Smith?" one snarled, dangling the torn fabric in front of him, the bloodstain glaring like an accusation. John's stomach plummeted. "That's not mine. I've never seen it before," he protested, his voice raw. But the guards just sneered. "You're under arrest," snarled Hicks, his grizzled face twisted in disgust as he seized John's wrists, wrenching them back until the joints groaned in protest. "What's the charge?" John shot back, his voice calm but his eyes blazing, searching for a lifeline in the chaos. "Sexual assault on an officer," Hicks spat, slamming John against the wall hard enough to rattle his teeth. "Your DNA's on the evidence." Caught red-handed, the words hit like a sucker punch, disbelief flooding John's veins as his mind scrambled to make sense of it. "That's a lie," he growled. But the guards didn't flinch. They hauled him through the corridor, past the inmates' cells where fists banged on bars and voices howled taunts like hyenas circling a wounded animal. "Fresh meat's done for," one jeered, while another hissed, "Should have kept your hands to yourself, Smith." The cacophony clawed at his ears, but John kept his head high, defiance burning through the humiliation. In the warden's office, Jane leaned against the desk, her uniform crisp and her smirk sharper than a shank. "Told you to play nice," she murmured, her voice a venomous purr as she dangled a torn scrap of her uniform blood-streaked and damning before his eyes. "Now you're mine." The setup was flawless, skin cells and blood, somehow tagged to John's profile, painting him as the monster she wanted the world to see. The guards shoved him toward solitary confinement, their grips bruising his arms as they dragged him down a dim stairwell, the air growing colder and thicker with every step. The cell door crashed shut behind him, a metallic scream that echoed through the block, and as the lock clicked, John stood alone in the flickering gloom, the weight of Jane's frame job threatening to crush him. Solitary was a pit of despair carved from concrete and shadow, a 5x7 box where hope went to die. The walls oozed dampness, the air tasted of mold, and a single bulb buzzed overhead, its weak light stuttering like a dying pulse. John paced the cramped space, his boots scuffing the grimy floor, his breath visible in the chill as fury and fear wrestled in his gut. He'd faced down cartels in smoke-filled dens and dodged bullets in alleys where death lurked around every corner, but this was a cage of a different kind, one forged by betrayal and locked tight by corruption. Jane had played her hand like a master, turning the prison into her chessboard and John into a pawn she aimed to sacrifice. Yet even as the walls closed in, something inside him refused to buckle. He dropped onto the cot, a slab of canvas stretched over rusted springs, and his fingers brushed a folded scrap of paper tucked beneath the frame. It was a smuggled note from Pops, the old lifer who'd become his shadow in this hellhole. Delivered with a sleight of hand during the arrest's chaos, John unfolded it with trembling fingers, the words scrawled in a hurried cipher he'd memorized years ago. "Mission critical, get the evidence and get out." His CIA handler's command sliced through the haze, a tether pulling him back to who he really was, a covert operative, not just some inmate to be broken. He leaned against the wall, the cold seeping into his back as he closed his eyes, summoning Lisa's face from the depths of his memory. Her voice whispered through the dark, "Come back to us, no matter what," and he could almost feel her fingers threading through his, anchoring him to the promise he'd made. "I swore to my wife I'd stay true," he thought, his voice echoing in his mind like a vow carved in stone. "I wasn't breaking now." The words fueled him, steadying his racing heart as the mission snapped back into focus. Infiltrate Marcus's drug ring, gather the intel, and get out alive. Jane's frame job wasn't the end, it was a detour. And he'd be damned if he let it stop him. That note wasn't just a message, it was a match struck in the dark, igniting the ember of resolve that had smoldered beneath his fear. John's pacing quickened, his mind shedding the victim's fog and sharpening into the weapon he'd been trained to wield. Jane thought she'd cornered him, stripped him bare, but she'd misjudged the man she'd targeted. She messed with the wrong guy, he whispered, the words slipping out like a promise, low and lethal, reverberating off the cell's walls. His lips twitched into a hard, dangerous smile. He wasn't prey anymore, he was the predator recalibrating his sights. The plan took shape with every step. He'd use solitary to his advantage, let Jane think he was beaten while he pieced together his counterstrike. He needed evidence, hard proof of her corruption and Marcus's operation, not just to clear his name but to burn their empire to the ground. His allies were few but fierce, Pops, who'd risked his neck for the note, Rico, the wiry inmate who'd vouched for him when the rumors spread, and maybe Hicks, if John could exploit the guard's gruff sense of duty. He crouched by the cot, tracing the note's edges as his thoughts raced. Jane had set the trap, but he'd turn it into her undoing. The flickering bulb caught the glint in his eyes, a spark of defiance growing into a blaze. Jane thought she'd won, but John was just getting started, the words ringing with the promise of a tide turning, of a man clawing his way back from the brink to seize control of the game. The moment John Smith emerged from solitary, Blackwood Penitentiary hummed with a new energy, a quiet, electric buzz that rippled through the cell block like the first tremor of an earthquake. He walked taller now, his eyes glinting with purpose, his every step a declaration that he was no longer prey but predator, a man who'd tasted despair and spat it back out with a plan burning in his chest. His first move was Tony Knuckles Ramirez, a lean inmate with a scar snaking from ear to jaw, a souvenir from a fight no one dared ask about but everyone feared to repeat. Tony had been watching John from the start, his stare too sharp across the chow line, his muttered questions too pointed during yard time, as if he could sense the secret simmering beneath John's prison-issue skin. One sweltering afternoon, the yard baked under a merciless sun, the air thick with sweat and dust, Tony approached John near the rusted weight bench, his voice a gravelly whisper. "You ain't like the rest, Smith. You move like you're waiting for something big. What's your angle?" John held his gaze, his heart thudding but his face stone, then took the leap, leaning closer. "I need evidence to bury her, Tony. Jane, the guard who's got me caged like a dog, she's dirty, and I'm gonna prove it." Tony's eyes flickered with suspicion, then sparked with recognition, a slow, jagged grin splitting his face. "That witch? Oh, she's had it out for you since you got here. I seen her smirk when they dragged you to the hole. She's in deep with Marcus too, ain't she?" John nodded, his jaw tight, up to her neck in his drug game. "I need to take them both down, and I can't do it alone." Tony scratched his stubbled chin, glancing at the guards pacing the perimeter, then stuck out a calloused hand. "You got me, Smith, but you screw me over, and they'll need a mop to find you." John gripped it hard, the pact sealed in sweat and steel, two outcasts forging a lifeline in a den of wolves. Their next play was the linchpin, a CIA recorder, a sleek little marvel, smuggled in through Tony's web of prison know-how, no bigger than a matchbox but heavy with the promise of justice. Tony set it up, whispering to John in the dim glow of the boiler room, "It's in the maintenance closet, taped under the third shelf. Don't get caught, or we're both ghosts." That night, as the prison groaned under its own weight, John slipped down the shadowed corridor, his pulse a drumbeat in his ears, while Tony lingered near the door, whistling off-key to mask the creak of hinges. Inside, the air was sour with grease and damp, and John's fingers fumbled over the shelf until they brushed the device. Cool and deadly, wrapped in a scrap of rag, he pocketed it, his breath hitching, and darted out as Tony flashed a quick nod before vanishing into the dark. Planting it was pure adrenaline. John picked the mess hall, a chaos of clattering trays and barked insults, where Marcus sprawled like a king at his corner table, his crew orbiting him like vultures. During a staged tussle over a moldy roll, John dropped to one knee, slid the recorder under the bench, and watched its tiny red eye wink once before fading into shadow, his stomach twisting as he stood, every muscle screaming to run but his face blank as stone. The device was live now, a silent sentinel poised to catch Jane's venom and Marcus's schemes, but the risk gnawed at him. Marcus's goons were everywhere, their eyes like hawks, and Jane's paranoia was a beast with teeth, her boots stomping closer each day as she sensed something brewing. That night, John lay on his cot, the bunk springs creaking under him, his mind racing with visions of the recorder's hum picking up every word, every threat, every damning deal, while the walls seemed to close in, whispering failure with every echo. Then came the boldest gambit, Officer Ruiz, a guard with slumped shoulders and a flicker of decency in his weary eyes. A man who'd signed up to uphold the law but found himself choking on Jane's corruption. John had clocked him early, noting how Ruiz's lip curled when Jane barked orders, how his hands hesitated during searches, like he was wrestling a ghost. During a routine pat-down in the infirmary, the air sharp with antiseptic and stale hope, John tested the waters, his voice a thread. "You see it, don't you? Jane's filth. It's rotting this place, and you're stuck in it." Ruiz froze, his fingers twitching against John's jumpsuit, then rasped, "Watch your mouth, inmate," but his eyes betrayed him, darting to the door, and John pressed on, "I'm not the enemy here, help me, and we can enter." Over days, in stolen seconds behind the laundry bins, under the flicker of a dying bulb, John chipped away, laying bare his truth. The frame-up, the drugs, the recorder. Ruiz listened, his face a war zone of doubt and duty, until one storm-soaked evening, as rain lashed the bars and thunder shook the walls, he shoved a wad of papers into John's hand, his voice rough. "Logs, reports, proof she's shielding Marcus. Don't drag me down with you, Smith." John clutched the documents, pages of dates, names, Jane's looping scrawl tying her to every dirty drop, and stashed them in his sleeve, his chest tight with a cocktail of triumph and terror. Because Ruiz was a lifeline and a loose cannon, a man who could save him or sell him out with a single word. The evidence was stacking up, a tower of cards ready to topple Jane's empire, but the game was far from won. The suspense was a living thing now, wrapping around John like barbed wire, tightening with every heartbeat. Marcus's crew prowled the yard, their stares lingering too long, their knuckles cracking like gunfire. One dusk, as John crossed the mess hall, he saw Marcus loom over that corner table, his shadow swallowing the bench, his scuffed boot grazing the recorder's edge, and John's lungs locked, his vision tunneling as he braced for the scrape of metal on concrete, the shout of discovery. But Marcus turned, growling at a lackey, and the moment passed, leaving John dizzy with relief and dread. Jane, meanwhile, was unraveling, her control slipping as John's defiance grew roots. She ordered shakedowns at dawn, her voice a shriek, "Tear his cell apart, find me something." But John was a ghost, the recorder safe, the documents tucked into a gutted book in the library, Tony running interference with a smirk and a shrug. She paced the corridors, her heels a staccato threat, her eyes boring into John during lineup, missing the irony that every sneer she spat, every bribe she bragged about, was feeding the recorder's hunger, her own words weaving the noose she'd never see coming. John had turned the prison into his chessboard, sliding pawns and rooks while Jane fumbled with checkers, blind to the checkmate inching closer with every breath she took. She thought she'd crushed him, but she'd only sharpened him into something deadly, a man who'd flip her own game and watch her fall. Tension was a vice, squeezing tighter with each unanswered question. Would Ruiz buckle under Jane's glare, spilling John's plan in a fit of panic? Could the recorder survive another day, its secrets intact, or would Marcus's next tantrum kick it loose? And when the final move came, would John's fragile web of trust and cunning hold, or shatter under the weight of Blackwood's wrath? The stakes loomed large, the air thick with the promise of reckoning, pulling you to the brink as John poised himself for the endgame, his eyes alight with a fire Jane would never extinguish. The courtroom simmered with a tension so thick it clung to the air like humidity before a storm, its high ceilings and mahogany walls amplifying every creak of a chair and every stifled cough from the packed gallery as the trial of John Smith commenced under the stern gaze of Judge Harold Grayson, his black robe a symbol of impending reckoning. Officer Jane Doe strode to the witness stand with the swagger of a predator, her badge gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights, her lips curling into a smirk that oozed confidence as she adjusted the microphone and began her testimony, her voice cutting through the silence like a shard of glass. "He attacked me, Your Honor. He's dangerous, a menace to every officer at Blackwood Penitentiary, unhinged and violent, and I barely escaped with my life." Her words dripped with rehearsed sincerity, her eyes darting to John, shackled in his orange jumpsuit, his face impassive yet simmering with something unspoken as she wove her tapestry of lies, painting herself the victim and him the monster, while the jury shifted uncomfortably, their brows furrowing, and the spectators leaned forward, a collective breath held in anticipation of what might come next. Jane's smirk widened as she stepped down, certain her performance had sealed John's fate, but then he rose, chains clanking softly, his broad shoulders squared as he approached the stand, and the room hushed as if the universe itself paused to listen. "I'm not who they think I am," he declared, his voice low and steady, building like a gathering storm. "I'm a CIA agent, embedded undercover to dismantle a drug ring festering within these prison walls, and I've got proof that will bury every lie she just told." The revelation landed like a thunderbolt, electrifying the courtroom. Jurors' jaws dropped, the prosecutor froze mid-scribble, and Jane's smug facade cracked, her eyes widening in a flash of primal fear as John nodded to his lawyer, a wiry figure named Ellis who produced a sleek audio device, its metallic surface catching the light like a weapon drawn for battle. "Your Honor, permission to play the recordings," Ellis intoned, and with Grayson's curt nod, the first sound burst forth, a crackle, then Jane's voice, cold and venomous, snarling through the speakers. "You'll wish you'd said yes, inmate, because I can make your life hell," followed by her chilling laugh, a sound that turned the air rancid. Another clip followed, Marcus's guttural drawl confessing, "Shipments hitting Tuesday laundry truck, pure as snow, 50 keys at least," and with each damning word, the courtroom ignited. Gasps ricocheted off the walls, jurors clutched their notepads, and spectators murmured in disbelief as the recordings painted a vivid picture of corruption and crime. Jane's blackmail entwined with Marcus's drug empire in a web so tight it choked her lies into silence. Jane lurched to her feet, her face drained of color, her hands slamming the railing as she screamed, "This is a setup, a fabrication, he's framing me." But her protests drowned in the swelling tide of outrage, and Judge Grayson's gavel crashed down with the force of divine judgment, his voice booming, "Officer Doe, you are hereby under arrest for corruption, evidence tampering, conspiracy, and anything else these tapes prove. Bailiffs, take her into custody." The bailiffs surged forward, seizing Jane's arms as she thrashed and howled, "No, you can't do this, I'm innocent." Her uniform now a mockery of authority as they dragged her toward the exit, her heels scraping the floor, her shouts echoing into futility while the crowd erupted in a cacophony of cheers and jeers, a visceral release of pent-up fury at her betrayal. Beyond the courtroom doors, the scene shifted to the prison yard where, fueled by John's meticulously gathered intel, federal agents swarmed like locusts, rounding up Marcus and his crew, tattooed brutes in tattered jumpsuits, their scowls twisting into panic as handcuffs snapped shut, their empire of dope and despair collapsing under the weight of John's relentless courage. Back inside, John stood tall on the witness stand, his gaze steady, his scarred hands resting lightly on the rail as he watched Jane's downfall unfold, a slow-motion tableau of triumph etched into every line of his weathered face. A man who'd walked through fire and emerged not just alive but victorious. Jane fucked around and justice found her out, a line that crystallized the moment, tying the threads of outrage, revelation, and retribution into a knot of poetic closure, their words flashing in reenacted snippets. Jane's sneer as she threatened, Marcus's gruff bravado as he planned, then the cuffs locking around Jane's wrists with a metallic click that rang like a bell tolling her end, her figure shrinking as she was hauled away, and finally John, his head tilting back in a slow-motion exhale, the weight of his mission lifting as the crowd's roar faded to a distant hum, leaving only the sweet, heavy silence of justice served and a hero redeemed. As the segment began, the heavy prison gates creaked open, and John Smith stepped into the sunlight, a free man at last, his orange jumpsuit replaced by a simple suit, and though it hung loosely on his weary frame, his posture radiated strength. In the parking lot beyond, his wife Lisa and their 2 kids were waiting, their faces alight with anticipation. The reunion was raw and emotional. Lisa ran to him, tears streaming as she threw her arms around his neck, whispering, "You kept your promise." While the kids clinged to his legs, shouting, "Daddy," in a joyful chorus, John dropped to his knees, pulling them all into a tight embrace, his own tears falling as he repeats, "I'm home." The scene shifts to a polished CIA conference room, where Director Alvarez pins a medal to John's chest, declaring, "For exceptional bravery in service you dismantled a drug empire from the inside." The room fills with applause from colleagues who once doubted him, now honoring the hero he's become. John stood and gave a speech, steady and reflective. "I kept my vows to my family and my mission," tying his personal stakes to the justice he fought for. John turned a trap into a triumph, proving one man can change the game, a statement that celebrates his resilience and leaves a lasting echo of victory. John's fight wasn't just for him, it was for justice, for every soul who's ever faced the darkness and refused to break, ever stood up to unfair treatment. Drop your story in the comments, it might spark hope in someone else. This invitation connects John's journey to the viewer's own experiences, fostering a sense of community. Like if John's courage moved you, subscribe for more true stories, and hit the bell so you don't miss out, delivered with enthusiasm that mirrors the segment's energy. Next time, a whistleblower takes on a corrupt empire. Stay tuned.